The thing about the bayou is that everything in it is either hunting or being hunted. The water moccasins coiled on cypress knees, the gators drifting like logs until they are not, the nutria freezing at shadows. And then there was Chief Petty Officer Evangeline Thibodeau, standing waist-deep in black water at 0 dark 30, so still that the egrets had stopped noticing her 20 minutes ago. The four men on the boat behind her had learned years ago not to question when Vangie went still. It meant she had heard something they had not. Senior Chief Declan Rourke kept his hand steady on the throttle of the Special Operations craft, watching the back of her head like he had watched it for 15 years. The woman did not move. Did not breathe, it seemed. The Louisiana night pressed down on them, thick with humidity and the smell of decay and growth tangled together the way only the swamp could manage. Somewhere to the east, a bullfrog stopped mid-croak. "There," she said, her voice barely a ripple in the darkness. 40 meters, 2 degrees starboard. Sandbar shifted since last month. Rourke did not ask how she knew. He simply adjusted course, and the boat slid forward through water so black it swallowed their wake within seconds. Petty Officer Second Class Jerome Baptiste, who everyone called Watchman because the man never seemed to blink, leaned toward the new guy on the crew and whispered something about how the chief could smell a depth change before the sonar caught it. The new guy, a petty officer third class fresh from training, looked like he could not decide whether to be impressed or terrified. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from tonight. Maybe you've spent time in these Louisiana waters yourself, or know someone who serves in special operations. The training run completed without incident, which was exactly how Evangeline preferred her nights. Boring meant everyone went home. Boring meant no letters to write, no flags to fold. She hauled herself onto the dock at Naval Station New Orleans as the first gray light bled into the eastern sky, water streaming from her uniform, and found Senior Chief Rourke waiting with 2 cups of coffee and an expression she did not like. "What?" she said, not a question. "New commanding officer arrived yesterday, while we were out. Lieutenant Commander Ashworth." Rourke handed her the coffee. "He wants to see you at 0700. Evangeline took a long drink, letting the bitter heat burn away the chill of the swamp water. That gave her 90 minutes to shower, change, and mentally prepare for whatever fresh nonsense the Navy had decided to drop on her doorstep. She had outlasted 4 commanding officers in her 12 years with Special Boat Team 22. She would outlast this one too. But when she walked into the operations building at 0655, she understood immediately that this one would be different. Lieutenant Commander Preston Ashworth III stood in the center of the briefing room like a man posing for a portrait. His uniform looked like it had been pressed minutes ago, every crease sharp enough to cut glass. Blonde hair, regulation perfect, jaw clenched in what she suspected was his resting expression, and eyes, pale blue and calculating, that tracked her entrance the way a banker tracks an unfavorable investment. "Chief Petty Officer Thibodeau," he said, and somehow made her name sound like a diagnosis. "I have been reviewing personnel files. Yours is—" He paused, searching for the word unusual. Evangeline came to attention, her face carefully blank. "Unusual how, sir?" He picked up a folder from the table, flipping through pages he had clearly already memorized. 12 years in special warfare. Multiple combat deployments. Commendations for actions and locations that are still classified. He looked up, and yet here you are, running boats through swamps instead of, well. He let the sentence hang. "Instead of what, sir?" Ashworth smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "I spent 15 years on destroyers, Chief. Real ships, real operations. I requested this command because I believe special boat teams have lost their way. Too much cowboy mentality. Not enough discipline." He set the folder down, particularly in units that have allowed, shall we say, non-traditional personnel to lower standards. The insult landed exactly where he intended it. Evangeline felt the heat rise in her chest but kept her voice level. "My fitness reports speak for themselves, sir. Reports can be," he said slowly, charitable. "I prefer to form my own assessments. Starting today, I will be personally evaluating every operator in this command." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his aftershave, something expensive and entirely wrong for Louisiana humidity. Particularly those whose presence here raises questions about the integrity of our selection process. Behind her, she heard the door open, sensed Rourke and Baptiste entering, then stopping dead as they registered the tension in the room. "You are dismissed, Chief," Ashworth said. "For now." Evangeline executed a perfect about-face and walked out without looking at her crew. She did not trust herself to speak, did not trust what her face might show if she met their eyes. She made it to the boat bay before her hands started shaking. Not from fear. Evangeline Thibodeau had faced things in the dark that would break most people. No, her hands shook from the effort of keeping her anger contained, of not walking back into that room and telling that pressed uniform politician exactly what she thought of his assessment. 12 years. 12 years of proving herself in waters most sailors would not enter in daylight. 12 years of bringing every single operator home alive. And this man had looked at her record and seen only her gender. Rourke found her there 10 minutes later, staring at the boats she had piloted through hell and back. "That bad?" he asked. "Worse." She finally looked at him. "He is not here to command December. He is here to clean house. And I am at the top of his list." Rourke was quiet for a long moment. Then, well, he crossed his arms, his Boston accent thickening the way it did when he was angry. "Guess he does not know what he is hunting." "No," Evangeline said softly, turning back to the water. "He does not, but he was about to find out." The word spread through Special Boat Team 22 like fire through dry marsh grass. By noon, every operator on the compound knew that the new CO had drawn a target on Chief Thibodeau, and by evening, the battle lines had quietly formed. Evangeline saw it in the way conversations stopped when Ashworth walked past, in the way her crew positioned themselves between her and the operations building without being asked, in the way Master Chief Cordelia Vance, the Command Master Chief for the entire Naval Special Warfare Group 4, appeared at the boat bay that afternoon with no apparent reason other than to watch Evangeline run maintenance checks. "You have got an interesting first day with the new leadership," Vance said, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who had survived 2 decades of Navy politics. Word travels fast in this community. Evangeline did not look up from the engine she was inspecting. "Nothing I have not handled before, Master Chief." Vance was quiet for a moment. The older woman had broken barriers herself back when there were even fewer women in special operations support roles. She understood things that did not need to be spoken. "I knew your mother," she said finally. "Did you know that?" Evangeline's hands stilled on the engine block. "No, Master Chief. I did not." She was one of the first women to support SEAL operations from the logistics side. "Before your time. Before most people's time." Vance moved closer, lowering her voice. "There are people in this community who remember the Thibodeau name, Chief. Remember what it stands for. Do not let one officer with a grudge make you forget that." Before Evangeline could respond, Vance was walking away, her posture suggesting she had never stopped to talk at all. That night, Evangeline sat alone in the team's ready room, updating maintenance logs that did not need updating, when Baptiste appeared in the doorway. His usual easy grin was nowhere to be found. "Chief, we got a problem." She looked up. Defined problem. Baptiste stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Webb, that new petty officer first class who transferred in last week with Ashworth. He has been going through the equipment lockers, asking questions about inventory, checking serial numbers against records." Evangeline felt something cold settle in her stomach. Equipment accountability was her responsibility. Any discrepancy, any missing item, any record that did not match would fall directly on her. What did he find? Nothing yet. But Watchman hesitated. "Chief, I have been in long enough to know what a setup looks like. This feels like someone looking for something to find." She thought about Ashworth's pale eyes, his carefully chosen words about assessments and evaluations, the way he had smiled without warmth. A man like that did not make threats he could not back up. If he wanted her gone, he would manufacture the evidence to make it happen. "Who else knows about this?" she asked. "Just me and Rourke. We figured you'd want to handle it quiet." Evangeline stood, rolling her shoulders to release tension that had been building all day. Give me the inventory records from the last 6 months. Everything. I want to go through them line by line before Webb gets the chance to find whatever he is looking for. Baptiste nodded, then paused. Chief, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why do you stay? He shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the question even as he asked it. You have got more time than half the officers in this command. You could have gone instructor duty years ago. Could have taken a short billet, lived easy until retirement. Why do you keep doing this? Evangeline considered the question. Through the ready room window, she could see the boats resting in their berths, sleek shapes designed for waters most vessels could not navigate. She had piloted craft like these through mangrove channels so narrow the branches scraped the hull, through open ocean swells that would swamp a lesser boat, through darkness so complete that only instinct and 20 generations of Bayou blood kept her on course. You ever hear about the Lupter Baptiste? He blinked at the apparent change of subject. The Cajun werewolf thing. My grandma used to tell stories. Mine too. She turned back to face him. My grandmother told me that our family has always had something wild in the blood, something that does not fit in polite places. She said the swamp calls to us because we are part of it, born from it. She smiled, but there was an edge to it. I stay because this is what I am, watchman. This is where I belong. And I will be damned if some Virginia pretty boy in a pressed uniform is going to tell me otherwise. Baptiste let out a low whistle. Remind me never to get on your bad side, Chief. Smart man. Now, go give me those records. He left, and Evangeline turned back to the window. The Louisiana night pressed against the glass, alive with sounds that city people would call chaos, but that she heard as symphony. Somewhere out there, beyond the base fences and the civilized lights, the bayou waited. Her bayou. Her birthright. Ashworth thought he was hunting her. He thought his Annapolis education and his destroyer credentials and his political connections made him the predator in this scenario. He had no idea. She worked through the night, cross-referencing every inventory sheet, every equipment check, every transfer form. By 0400, her eyes burned and her coffee had gone cold, but she had found it. A discrepancy. A single night vision device logged as returned, but never actually checked back into the armory. The paperwork bore her signature, but Evangeline knew she had never signed it. The handwriting was close enough to fool a casual observer, but the letter G was wrong. She always wrote her GS with a closed loop. This signature had an open tail. Someone had forged her name. Someone had created evidence that she had either stolen or lost a piece of sensitive equipment worth thousands of dollars. The kind of discrepancy that ended careers. The kind that turned commendations into court-martials. Evangeline photographed everything. The forged signature. The original forms that showed her actual handwriting. The inventory logs that proved the device had been properly returned before being quietly removed from the records. Rourke found her at 0530, still sitting with the evidence spread across the table. How bad? He asked. Bad enough. She looked up at him with eyes that had gone cold and hard. But not as bad as it is going to get for whoever did this. Rourke studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. What do you need? Time. Evangeline gathered the photographs, the documents, the proof of her own innocence and someone else's guilt. And for Ashworth to keep thinking he is the most dangerous thing on this base. She headed for the door, then stopped. December. That equipment that went missing from the records. Find it. Quietly. I want to know exactly where it ended up and whose fingerprints are on it. And if those fingerprints belong to someone with officer insignia. Evangeline smiled. And it was the smile of something with teeth. Then we will know exactly what kind of war we are fighting. Rourke found the night vision device 3 days later, tucked into a storage locker assigned to Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb. The same Webb who had been conducting inventory checks. The same Webb who had transferred in with Ashworth. The same Webb whose service record showed a career of mediocrity punctuated by sudden promotions that coincided with assignments under officers from prominent families. The man was a fixer, a cleaner, someone who made problems disappear for people with enough rank to protect him from consequences. Evangeline studied the photographs Rourke had taken, the device sitting in Webb's locker with her forged signature on the checkout form still attached. A neat package designed to destroy her the moment someone decided to look. "We could report this now," Rourke said. "Take it straight to the Inspector General. Skip the chain of command entirely." "And say what?" Evangeline set the photographs down. "That our new commanding officer is running a conspiracy to frame me." "With what proof?" "Webb will say he found the device and was preparing to report it. Ashworth will express shock and disappointment. My signature is on that form, December. Forged or not, it is my name. So we just wait for them to spring the trap." "No, we spring our own first." She had spent the past 3 days watching, learning. Ashworth ran the command like a man who had never had to earn respect, only demand it. He scheduled inspections designed to find fault, questioned decisions that had kept operators alive for years, countermanded standing orders that existed for reasons he had never bothered to learn. And through it all, Webb shadowed him like a loyal hound, taking notes, asking questions, building a case against everyone who failed to show proper deference. But Ashworth had made a mistake. He had assumed that Evangeline would react the way women, in his experience, always reacted. Quietly, carefully, trying to work within a system designed to exclude them. He did not understand that she had not survived 12 years in special warfare by playing by rules written to ensure her failure. The training exercise was scheduled for Thursday, a standard small boat insertion drill in the Bayou Channel south of the city. Ashworth had announced he would be observing personally, evaluating crew performance, and he made clear with a pointed look at Evangeline leadership effectiveness. She knew it was a setup. The location he had chosen, a stretch of waterway called Devil's Elbow, was notoriously difficult to navigate. Shifting sandbars, submerged debris, currents that changed with the tide. It was the kind of place where even experienced operators made mistakes, and mistakes in front of a hostile commanding officer became career-ending failures. What Ashworth did not know was that Evangeline had been running Devil's Elbow since she was 12 years old, sitting in the bow of her grandfather's fishing boat, learning to read water the way other children learn to read books. The night before the exercise, she drove south out of New Orleans, past the sprawl of suburbs and strip malls, past the refineries and chemical plants, until the road narrowed and the cypress trees closed in and the only lights were the stars and the distant glow of fishing camps. Her family's camp sat at the end of a shell road that was not on any map, a weathered structure on stilts that had survived hurricanes her grandmother still talked about. Evangeline sat on the dock, her feet dangling over water that moved with slow purpose toward the Gulf. The sounds of the swamp wrapped around her, frogs and insects and the occasional splash of something hunting in the shallows. She had come here after every deployment, every loss, every moment when the weight of what she did threatened to crush her. The bayou did not judge, did not demand explanations. It simply was ancient and patient and utterly indifferent to human concerns. Her phone buzzed. A text from Baptiste. "Rourke says Webb filed a request for your personnel records. Full jacket. Everything back to boot camp." They were accelerating. Whatever Ashworth had planned, he wanted it done quickly. Wanted her gone before she could mount a defense. Evangeline thought about her grandmother, who had died when she was 16. The old woman had lived through things she never fully explained, had friends who visited late at night, and spoken languages Evangeline did not recognize, had a trunk in the attic filled with photographs of young men and women in uniforms that were not quite American. Once, when Evangeline was very young, she had asked her grandmother what she did during the war. The old woman had smiled, her eyes holding secrets that stretched back decades. "I did what our family has always done, Cher. I moved through dark water and came out the other side." Now Evangeline understood what that meant. Now she carried the same weight, the same silence, the same knowledge of things done in darkness that kept the light burning for everyone else. She was still sitting on the dock when her phone buzzed again. This time, a number she did not recognize. She answered anyway. Chief Thibodeau. The voice was male, older, roughened by years of cigarettes or salt air or both. "My name is Raymond Delacroix. I served with your grandmother a long time ago. I think we need to talk. Evangeline felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. How did you get this number? Your mother gave it to me before she passed. Told me to use it if you ever needed help. A pause. Word is you have got yourself a situation with your new commanding officer. Word travels fast. In this community, it does. Another pause, longer this time. I know things about your family, Chief. Things that might help you understand what you're dealing with. Things that go back further than Ashworth, further than the Navy, further than you might believe. The swamp sound seemed to grow louder around her, as if the bayou itself was listening. Where can we meet? She asked. You know the old Broussard place, past Cockadry. Come alone. Call me Adam. And Chief. He let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Do not trust anyone in your chain of command. This thing you have stumbled into is bigger than one officer with a grudge. The line went dead. Evangeline stared at her phone, then out at the dark water where something large had just surfaced and submerged again without a ripple. Bigger than one officer. She had thought she was fighting for her career. Now she was beginning to wonder if she was fighting for something else entirely. The morning of the training exercise dawned gray and heavy, the kind of Louisiana weather that pressed down on the chest and turned the air to soup. Evangeline had not slept. She had spent the hours after Delacroix's call running scenarios in her head, trying to understand how a simple personality conflict with a new commanding officer had become something that required warnings about chains of command and mysterious meetings in the deep swamp. But that was a problem for later. Right now, she had a more immediate battle to win. The crews assembled at 0600 for boats with full complements, enough personnel that Ashworth could evaluate multiple operators simultaneously. He stood on the dock in his inspection posture, Webb at his elbow with a tablet, recording everything. The rain had started as a mist, but was building towards something more serious. Chief Thibodeau. Ashworth's voice cut through the pre-mission chatter. You will be lead boat today. I want to see how you perform under direct observation. Of course he did. Evangeline kept her face neutral. Understood, sir. The route to Devil's Elbow took 40 minutes at standard speed, winding through channels that grew progressively narrower as they moved south. Evangeline stood at the helm of the lead craft, reading the water the way her blood had taught her, feeling the currents shift beneath the hull. Behind her, Rourke ran the navigation console, while Baptiste manned the forward gun mount. Ashworth had positioned himself on the second boat, close enough to observe, but far enough to claim objectivity. Webb sat beside him, tablet glowing even in the gray morning light. The first test came at the entrance to Devil's Elbow itself, with a main channel split into 3 tributaries. Standard navigation charts showed the center passage as the primary route. The charts were wrong. They had been wrong for 2 years, ever since a storm surge had deposited a debris field that lurked just below the surface at high tide. Evangeline swung the boat hard to starboard, taking the narrow eastern passage that looked impassable but opened into clear water after the first bend. Chief, what are you doing? Ashworth's voice crackled over the radio. The primary channel is center passage. Negative, sir. Center passage has submerged obstruction. Eastern route is clear. A pause. The charts show center passage as navigable. The charts are outdated, sir. I updated my report 3 months ago, recommending revision. Evangeline kept her voice professional even as she heard the irritation in his. Request was still pending approval when you assumed command. She could practically hear his teeth grinding through the radio. Proceed. The eastern passage required precision. Cypress knees jutted from the shallows on both sides, and the current pushed hard against the hull where the tide fought the river. Evangeline made micro-adjustments without conscious thought, her hands moving on the controls the way a musician's hands moved on an instrument. Behind her, she heard one of the newer crew members exhale slowly as they cleared a gap with inches to spare. The exercise proper began once they reached the insertion point, a stretch of marsh where the SEALs would theoretically be deploying for a reconnaissance mission. Evangeline ran her crew through the procedures with mechanical efficiency. Every movement practiced, every contingency accounted for. And then Webb's voice came over the radio. Sir, I am showing an equipment discrepancy on Boat 1. Night vision device serial number does not match manifest. Evangeline felt ice spread through her chest. This was it, the trap, sprung in the middle of an exercise where she could not defend herself, where Ashworth could claim he had discovered the discrepancy through routine inspection. But Rourke was faster. He keyed his own radio before Ashworth could respond. Negative on that discrepancy. I personally verified all equipment this morning. Serial numbers match. Happy to provide photographic documentation timestamped at 0530. A long silence. Evangeline glanced back at Rourke, who gave her the slightest nod. He had anticipated this, had created a paper trail that Webb's planted evidence could not overcome. We will address this back at base, Ashworth finally said. Continue the exercise. They continued, and Evangeline made sure that every single maneuver, every single procedure, every single decision was textbook perfect. Not because she needed to prove herself to Ashworth, but because her crew was watching. Because the younger sailors needed to see that excellence was not a defense against politics, but it was still worth pursuing. The rain intensified as they began the return transit, visibility dropping to near zero. Standard procedure called for reduced speed and increased spacing between boats. Ashworth, predictably, demanded they maintain pace. We have a schedule to keep, Chief. This is not a pleasure cruise. Sir, conditions warrant reduced speed for safety. Are you refusing a direct order? Evangeline felt every eye on her boat turn in her direction. This was the moment. Refuse the order, and he had grounds for insubordination. Follow the order, and she risked her crew. She chose a third option. Reducing to three-quarter speed as conditions warrant, she announced over the radio. All boats maintain visual contact with lead vessel. She paused just long enough. Sir, I am happy to discuss the safety regulations that govern this decision when we return to base. Another long silence. Ashworth could push back, but doing so would require him to explicitly order her to violate safety protocols. In front of witnesses, with radio traffic that would be logged and recorded. Proceed, he said finally. The return trip took longer than the outbound journey, but every boat made it back to the dock without incident. Evangeline secured her vessel and was helping her crew with post-operation checks when Ashworth appeared beside her, close enough that only she could hear. You think you're clever, he said quietly. You think you have outmaneuvered me today. Evangeline continued coiling a line, not looking at him. I think I followed proper safety procedures, sir. Your grandmother played games like this too. Ashworth's voice dropped even lower. Did you know that? She thought she was untouchable. She thought her little swamp rat tricks made her special. She was wrong. He walked away before Evangeline could respond, but the words hit her like a physical blow. Your grandmother. Ashworth did not just know about her family. He knew something specific about her grandmother. Something personal. Something that had clearly been passed down through his own family like a grudge waiting to be settled. This was not about her career. This was not even about her. This was about history, about debts and grievances that stretched back generations. And Evangeline was beginning to understand that she had inherited enemies she had never known existed. The official notice arrived 2 days later. Evangeline found it in her inbox, a formal memorandum with Ashworth's signature at the bottom and language so carefully crafted that it almost disguised what it actually was. A recommendation for removal from special warfare qualification. The grounds cited were extensive. Failure to maintain equipment accountability. Questions regarding leadership judgment. Concerns about fitness for continued duty in a demanding operational environment. Each accusation was vague enough to be difficult to refute, but specific enough to sound damning. At the bottom, a single line informed her that she had 72 hours to submit a written response before the recommendation would be forwarded to Naval Special Warfare Group 4 for action. 72 hours to save 12 years of service. Evangeline read the memorandum 3 times, feeling something crack inside her that she had not known was holding together. She had survived firefights, had pulled wounded operators from burning wreckage, had navigated through conditions that should have killed her crew a dozen times over. And now a man who had never heard a shot fired in anger was going to end her career with paperwork. She did not go to the boat bay that morning, did not attend the morning briefing, did not do any of the things that Chief Petty Officer Thibodeau had done every single day for 12 years. Instead, she drove south, past the city limits, past the refineries, past everything that smelled of civilization, until she reached the family camp and could finally let herself fall apart. The tears came without warning and would not stop. Not tears of sadness, exactly, but something more complicated. Rage and grief and exhaustion all twisted together until she could not tell where one ended and another began. She sat on the dock where her grandfather had taught her to read water, where her mother had told her stories about the family's history, where her grandmother had once said that the Thibodeau women were made of swamp water and stubborn, and she let herself be weak for the first time in longer than she could remember. Her phone rang 6 times before she finally answered. "Chief, where are you?" Baptiste's voice was tight with worry. "Rourke is losing his mind. Ashworth is asking questions." "I needed a day," she said, and hated how hollow her voice sounded. A pause. "You saw the memo?" "Yeah, I saw it." "Chief, listen to me." Baptiste dropped his voice to barely above a whisper. "Master Chief Vance came by this morning asking for you." She would not say why, but she left a message. She said to tell you that paperwork travels slow when certain offices are understaffed. She said you have more time than you think. Evangeline blinked, processing. Vance was running interference, slowing the bureaucratic machinery to give her room to maneuver. It was a risk for someone in Vance's position, the kind of quiet rebellion that could end careers if discovered. "She's not the only one," Baptiste continued. "Half the operators on this base have served with you. They know what you have done, what you are. Ashworth thinks he is fighting one woman. He does not understand he is fighting all of us." The words broke something loose in her chest, something that had been frozen since she read the memorandum. She was not alone, had never been alone. The family she had built over 12 years of service was standing with her, even when she could not stand herself. "Tell Rourke I will be back tomorrow," she said. "And Baptiste, thank you." She ended the call and sat in silence, watching the water move past the dock pilings. The afternoon sun had burned through the morning clouds, and the bayou was coming alive with activity. A great blue heron stood motionless in the shallows, waiting for prey. A family of nutria swam past in single file. Somewhere deeper in the swamp, a gator bellowed a territorial warning that echoed across the water. Her grandmother's trunk was still in the camp's attic, where it had sat since the old woman's death 18 years ago. Evangeline had never opened it, had respected her grandmother's privacy even after death. But Ashworth's words kept echoing in her mind. "Your grandmother played games like this too." The trunk was cedar, heavy, with brass fittings that had turned green with age. Evangeline carried it down to the main room and sat with it for a long time before finally lifting the lid. Inside, she found a life she had never known existed. Photographs of her grandmother as a young woman, standing with men and women in military uniforms that bore no unit insignia. Documents in French and English describing training programs that had never officially existed. A medal she did not recognize, its ribbon faded, but its meaning clear from the inscription on the back. For service beyond the call. OS, 1944, Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. Her grandmother had not just lived through the war. She had fought in it, had operated behind enemy lines, running networks through the Louisiana bayous that trained resistance fighters and smuggled intelligence. The swamp rat tricks Ashworth had mentioned were not family quirks. They were tradecraft, passed down through generations. At the bottom of the trunk, Evangeline found a letter. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the words were still legible. "Marie," it began, "if you're reading this, I am gone and you have found yourself in trouble. Our family has always had enemies. People who do not forget. People who pass grudges to their children like heirlooms. If someone comes for you wearing a familiar name, know that the fight is older than you. But know also that you come from warriors. The water is in your blood. Trust it." The letter was signed with a name Evangeline did not recognize. But beneath the signature, in her grandmother's handwriting, was an addition. For my Vangie, when she is ready. The man who wrote this was Raymond Delacroix. He will help you when no one else can. Find him. Trust him. Fight. Evangeline sat surrounded by her grandmother's secrets, holding a letter that had been waiting for her for nearly 2 decades. She had 72 hours to save her career. But now she understood that she was fighting for something much older than that. The old Broussard place had not been a place for 30 years. Hurricane Andrew had reduced it to pilings and memories, but the locals still used the name for the stretch of bayou where the house had stood. Evangeline navigated her flat-bottomed boat through channels that did not appear on any chart, following landmarks her grandfather had taught her. The cypress with the lightning scar, the bend where the water changed color, the island of marsh grass shaped like a sleeping dog. Raymond Delacroix was waiting on a dock that should not have existed, sitting in a rusted lawn chair with a shotgun across his knees and a cigarette burning between his fingers. He was old in the way that cypress trees were old, weathered and twisted but still standing. His face was a map of scar tissue and sun damage, and his eyes tracked her approach with the calm assessment of a man who had seen enough threats to no one when it appeared. "You look like her," he said as she tied off her boat. "Your grandmother. Same way of moving. Like you are ready to kill something, but have not decided what yet." Evangeline climbed onto the dock, keeping her hands visible. He had told her to come armed, and she had, but something about Delacroix suggested that weapons were a formality between people like them. "You said you knew her," Evangeline said. "The letter said you wrote to her in 1944. Delacroix took a long drag on his cigarette. "I was 19 years old and stupid enough to think I could fight a war by myself. Your grandmother showed me different. We ran operations out of these bayous for 2 years. Trained free French, smuggled intelligence, made life difficult for people who needed difficulty." He gestured toward a path barely visible through the undergrowth. "Come on. This is not a conversation for open water." His cabin was invisible until they were almost on top of it, built into a natural depression in the land and covered with vegetation that looked wild but was clearly maintained. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs and documents that made Evangeline's breath catch. She recognized some of the faces from her grandmother's trunk. Young men and women with hard eyes and easy smiles, posing with weapons and equipment that looked primitive by modern standards but deadly nonetheless. And in several of the photographs, standing with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged, was a young woman with dark hair and familiar features. "That was taken 3 days before we hit a German supply line running through occupied France," Delacroix said, pointing to one image. "Your grandmother planned the whole thing. Paddled 6 miles through enemy territory, set charges, paddled back out before anyone knew we were there. 12 enemy dead, not a scratch on our team." Evangeline stared at the photograph. The woman in it looked barely 20, but her eyes held the same stillness that Evangeline saw in her own mirror. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because the people who tried to stop us back then, they did not disappear when the war ended." Delacroix settled into a chair with the careful movements of an old man with old injuries. Some of them were American. Businessmen who made money off both sides. Families with connections to power who did not appreciate a bunch of swamp rats disrupting their arrangements. Your grandmother exposed one of them. A man named Ashworth. Evangeline felt the word land like a physical blow. Ashworth. Preston Ashworth Sr. Delacroix's voice went flat. He was running a smuggling operation through the Gulf, playing both sides against the middle. Your grandmother gathered evidence that would have put him in prison for the rest of his life. But he had friends in high places. The evidence disappeared. Ashworth got a slap on the wrist and a quiet discharge. But he never forgot who almost brought him down. And his grandson, Evangeline said slowly. "His grandson is my commanding officer." Delacroix nodded. Preston III has been raised on stories about how the Thibodeau family destroyed his grandfather's reputation. How a Cajun woman from the swamps humiliated one of Virginia's finest families. He has been waiting his whole career for a chance at revenge. This is not about my performance. This is not about women in special operations. No. Delacroix stood and walked to a locked cabinet, pulling out a folder thick with documents. This is about a grudge that has been festering for 80 years. And you're not the first Thibodeau he has targeted. He handed her the folder. Inside were service records, investigation reports, newspaper clippings. Her mother's name appeared on several documents, accompanied by allegations of misconduct that had been quietly dismissed. Her aunt, who had served in the Coast Guard, had faced similar accusations before taking early retirement. Every generation, Delacroix said quietly. They come for every generation. Your grandmother beat them. Your mother survived them. Now it is your turn. Evangeline flipped through the pages, watching the pattern emerge. Accusations without evidence. Investigations that went nowhere but left stains on records. Careers shortened not by failure, but by exhaustion. The Ashworth family had been waging a silent war against her bloodline for decades, and she had never known. How do I stop it, she asked. How do I end this? Delacroix smiled, and there was something dangerous in it. The same way your grandmother did. You expose them. You find the evidence of what they are really doing, and you make it impossible to ignore. He tapped the folder. Preston III did not request your command because he hates women in special operations. He requested it because he needed to be close to you. Close enough to finish what his grandfather started. What is he really doing? That, Delacroix said, is what you need to find out. But I can tell you where to start looking. His equipment discrepancy games, the inventory manipulation, is not just about framing you. Someone is moving things through your command that should not be moved. Equipment going missing on paper, but not in reality. Or maybe the other way around. He leaned forward, his old eyes sharp. Your grandmother followed the supplies to find the traitors. Follow the equipment, Chief Thibodeau. Find out what Ashworth is really covering up. Evangeline looked at the photograph of her grandmother one more time. The young woman stared back across 8 decades, her expression a challenge and a promise. The water is in your blood, the letter had said. Trust it. She intended to. Evangeline returned to base with 48 hours left on her response deadline, and a clarity she had not felt since Ashworth first walked into her life. The man wanted her destroyed, but destruction was not his only goal. Delacroix was right. The equipment manipulation was too elaborate for simple revenge. Ashworth was using her command to move something, and framing her was just a way to ensure no one looked too closely at the real operation. She found Rourke in the maintenance bay, elbow deep in an engine repair he did not need to be doing himself. He looked up when she entered, and the relief on his face made something twist in her chest. Thought you might not come back, he said quietly. And let Ashworth win. Evangeline shook her head. Not a chance. But I need your help with something, December. Something that goes beyond friendship and into territory that could end your career too. Rourke wiped his hands on a rag, his expression settling into the focused calm she had seen before operations that carried real risk. Tell me. She told him. All of it. Her grandmother's history. The Ashworth vendetta stretching back 80 years. Delacroix's suspicion that the equipment discrepancies were cover for something larger. Rourke listened without interrupting, his face growing grimmer with each revelation. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he let out a breath that was almost a laugh. You know, I always wondered why you were so good at this, he said. Figured it was just natural talent and stubbornness. Turns out you come from a whole line of dangerous women. Focus, December, right? He straightened, his mind clearly shifting into operational mode. The equipment records. If Ashworth is moving something through here, there will be a trail. Discrepancies that do not match his cover story. Items signed out for training that never actually get used. Items signed and that nobody ever sees. That is what I need you to find. Evangeline glanced toward the door, lowering her voice. Quietly. No official channels. Nothing that shows up on any system Ashworth can monitor. Rourke nodded slowly. Baptiste can help. The kid has a talent for finding information people want to stay hidden. What are you going to do? I'm going to give Ashworth exactly what he wants. The written response she submitted the next morning was a masterpiece of military bureaucracy. It addressed each allegation with detailed documentation, cited regulations that required additional review periods, and requested formal hearings that would take weeks to schedule. It was not a defense. It was a delay. Every day Ashworth spent fighting paperwork was a day Evangeline and her team had to dig into his real operation. Ashworth summoned her to his office within an hour of receiving it. "This is a waste of time," he said, holding the document like it offended him. "You know as well as I do how this ends." "With respect, sir, I know nothing of the sort." Evangeline kept her voice flat, her face empty. "I am exercising my right to due process. If my record cannot withstand scrutiny, then I deserve to be removed. But if it can, then these allegations should be withdrawn." His jaw tightened. "Your grandmother tried bureaucratic games too. It did not save her reputation." "My grandmother's reputation does not need saving, sir." Evangeline met his eyes directly for the first time. She served her country with distinction. Whatever stories your family has told themselves about her, the historical record is quite clear. Something shifted in Ashworth's expression, a flicker of uncertainty that he quickly buried. "You have been talking to someone." "I have been reading, sir. My grandmother kept excellent records." He stared at her for a long moment, and Evangeline saw a calculation happening behind his eyes. He was reassessing, trying to figure out how much she actually knew and whether it changed his approach. "Dismissed," he said finally. "We will see how your paperwork holds up." She left his office and walked straight to the boat bay, where Baptiste was waiting with a tablet he should not have had access to. Rourke was right, Baptiste said without preamble. "There's a pattern. Equipment checked out for training exercises that never happened. Boats logged as operational that have not left dock in months. And there is more." He swiped to a new screen. "Fuel consumption records. Someone is running boats at night. Off the books. No mission logs, no crew manifests, nothing official. Where are they going?" Baptiste pulled up a map. "Based on fuel usage and the boats being used, somewhere in the coastal waters south of here. Maybe the Barrier Islands. Maybe further into the Gulf." Evangeline studied the map, her mind running scenarios. The Barrier Islands were a maze of shifting sandbars and hidden channels. Perfect for smuggling. Perfect for operations that needed to stay invisible. "Can you track them?" she asked. "Not electronically. Whoever is doing this knows how to avoid the monitoring systems." But Baptiste smiled grimly. "I grew up fishing these waters, Chief. My uncle used to run cargo that he did not want the Coast Guard to see. If someone is moving boats through here at night, I can figure out where they're going. It is dangerous. If Ashworth catches you investigating, then I guess you better make sure he stays focused on you." Baptiste's expression hardened. "Chief, you gave me a chance when nobody else would. You trained me when other NCOs said I was not worth the time. Whatever this is, whatever Ashworth is really doing, I am not letting him destroy you for it." Evangeline looked at the young man she had mentored for 3 years, saw the determination in his eyes, saw her grandmother's legacy reflected in someone who shared no blood with her but had inherited the same stubborn refusal to let injustice stand. "All right," she said, "find me those boats. But Baptiste, be careful. These people have been playing this game for 80 years. They do not lose gracefully. Neither do we, Chief." That night, Evangeline lay awake in her quarters, listening to the distant sounds of the base settling into sleep. Somewhere out there, Baptiste was beginning his investigation. Somewhere, Rourke was digging through records that could get them all court-martialed. Somewhere, Ashworth was plotting his next move in a war he did not realize had been reframed. Her grandmother had fought this battle alone. Her mother had survived it through retreat. Evangeline intended to win it. Baptiste found them on the third night. A boat running dark through the coastal channels. No lights, no radio traffic, heading toward a stretch of Barrier Island that had been abandoned since the last hurricane scoured it clean. He did not follow too closely, just tracked their heading and marked the time. Then he came back and told Evangeline what he had seen. 2 men on the boat, he reported, keeping his voice low even though they were alone on the dock. Could not identify them in the dark, but the boat was one of ours. Hull number matched a craft that is supposed to be in maintenance. Supposed to be, Evangeline repeated. "I checked the bay this morning. Boat was right where the records said it should be. Wet though. Salt water on the deck that had not been there yesterday. So someone is taking our boats out at night, running to the Barrier Islands, and returning them before morning." Evangeline stared out at the water, her mind working through the implications. Was on those islands. Nothing official. Baptiste pulled out his phone, showing her satellite imagery. But there's an old fishing camp on the eastern shore. Hurricane damaged, but still standing. My uncle mentioned it once. Said some people use it for storage. Storage of what? He never said, but he also told me never to go near it. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was still incomplete. Ashworth was running some kind of operation through her command, using equipment and boats that were supposed to be under her accountability. If anything went wrong, if anyone looked too closely, the trail would lead directly to her. The framing was not just about revenge. It was about creating a scapegoat. The question was what he was moving and who he was moving it for. She got her answer 2 days later, when Master Chief Vance appeared at the boat bay with an expression that Evangeline had never seen on the older woman's face. Something between fury and fear. "We need to talk," Vance said. Privately. They walked to the far end of the dock, out of earshot of anyone on base. Vance stood with her back to the water, her eyes scanning for observers. "I've been doing some digging of my own," she said quietly. "After I heard about Ashworth's recommendation, something did not sit right. A commanding officer does not usually come into a new command with that much hostility toward a specific subordinate." "What did you find?" Vance hesitated. "This goes above my pay grade, Chief. Way above. But you deserve to know." She took a breath. "Ashworth's family has connections to defense contractors. Deep connections. His grandfather started a company after the war that has been selling equipment to the military for decades." "Equipment," Evangeline said slowly. "The kind of equipment that sometimes goes missing from inventory. The kind that shows up in places it should not be, sold to people who should not have it." Vance's voice dropped even lower. "There have been investigations before. Quiet ones. They never go anywhere because the family has friends in the right places. But the pattern is always the same. Equipment discrepancies at commands where an Ashworth has served. Scapegoats who take the fall. Careers destroyed while the real criminals walk away. And now Preston III is running the same operation through my command. That is what it looks like." Vance met her eyes. "Chief, I cannot officially help you with this. If I start making accusations against a commanding officer without proof, I will be finished. But I can tell you that there are people watching this situation. People who have been waiting for someone to finally catch an Ashworth in the act." "Who?" Vance shook her head. "I have already said too much. Just know that if you can find hard evidence, real evidence that cannot be buried or explained away, there are channels that will make sure it reaches the right desks." She walked away without another word, leaving Evangeline alone with the weight of what she had just learned. This was not just about her family's feud with the Ashworths. This was about a criminal enterprise that had been operating for generations, using military commands as cover for illegal arms dealing. Her grandmother had stumbled onto it 80 years ago and been silenced. Her mother had gotten too close and been pushed out. Now Evangeline was standing in the same crosshairs, and the only way out was through. That night, she gathered Rourke and Baptiste in a location off base, a bar in Chalmette where the music was loud enough to cover conversation and the clientele minded their own business. "We need to catch them in the act," she said. "Physical evidence of what they are moving and where it is going. That means following them to the island," Rourke said. "At night, in waters they know we might be watching. Can you think of another way?" He could not. Neither could Baptiste. "If we get caught," Baptiste said slowly, "this is not just career-ending. This is prison, unauthorized operation, theft of military equipment, possible espionage charges if they spin it right." "I know." Evangeline looked at both of them. "That is why I am not ordering you to do this. I am asking, and I will understand if either of you walks away." Rourke snorted. 15 years, Vangy. 15 years I have watched you do the impossible. You think I'm going to miss this one?" Baptiste just shook his head. "You already know my answer, Chief." Evangeline felt something settle in her chest. The same feeling she had before every operation that mattered. Fear and focus and absolute clarity about what needed to be done. "Tomorrow night," she said, "we follow them to the island. We document everything. And then we burn this whole thing down." They raised their glasses in silent agreement. Outside, the Louisiana night pressed against the windows, dark and patient and full of things that hunted without mercy. Evangeline intended to be one of them. The moon was a sliver of light behind clouds when they launched. Evangeline had chosen a civilian boat, a flat-bottomed skiff that her family had used for generations, nothing that could be traced back to the Navy. Rourke ran the small outboard motor at barely above idle, letting the current do most of the work as they slipped through channels that did not exist on official charts. Baptiste crouched in the bow with night vision equipment he had borrowed from sources he refused to name. Every few minutes, he would signal a course correction, guiding them through the maze of marsh grass and oyster beds that protected the barrier islands from casual approach. They had timed their departure to arrive 2 hours before the expected run. Evangeline wanted to be in position, invisible, before Ashworth's people even left the dock. She had learned patience in waters like these, had learned that the hunter who moved first often became the prey. The fishing camp emerged from the darkness like a wound in the landscape. Hurricane damage had collapsed half the structure, but the remaining portion had been reinforced with materials that looked far newer than they should have been. A dock extended into the water, sturdy enough to handle boats much larger than the skiffs that locals would use. Evangeline guided them to a position behind a dense stand of marsh grass, close enough to observe, but hidden from anyone approaching by water. They settled in to wait. The boat arrived just after 0200. Two figures, just as Baptiste had described, running without lights through channels they clearly knew well. They tied off at the dock and disappeared into the camp. 20 minutes later, they emerged carrying cases. Long, rectangular, the kind of cases that Evangeline recognized immediately. Weapons, Rourke breathed. They are moving weapons. She was already documenting. Her camera captured the men loading case after case onto the boat, captured the serial numbers stenciled on the sides, captured faces that became visible when one of them lit a cigarette and the brief flare illuminated features she recognized. Webb. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb, Ashworth's loyal shadow, loading military weapons onto an unmarked boat in the middle of the night. The other man she did not recognize, but his bearing and movements suggested military training. Someone from outside the command, perhaps. A contact from whatever network the Ashworth family had built over decades of quiet criminality. They worked quickly, efficiently, clearly practiced at this. Within 30 minutes, the boat was loaded and pulling away from the dock. Evangeline tracked their heading. South-southwest, toward open water, toward international shipping lanes where a small boat could rendezvous with larger vessels that asked no questions about cargo origins. "We have enough," Rourke whispered. "Let's get out of here." But Evangeline was not finished. The boat was gone, but the camp remained. And camps like this had records, had evidence that could not be loaded onto a skiff and carried away. "Wait here," she said. "Chief," Rourke grabbed her arm. "This is not the plan." The plan changed. She met his eyes in the darkness. "I need to know how deep this goes. I need proof that Ashworth is connected, not just his people." She did not wait for his response, slipped over the side of the skiff into water that came up to her waist, and began moving toward the camp with the silent patience of something born to these waters. The structure was unlocked. Why would it be otherwise? No one was supposed to know it existed. Inside, Evangeline found exactly what she had hoped for. Manifests, shipping schedules, photographs of equipment that matched items reported missing from a dozen different commands over the past 5 years. And correspondence, letters and printed emails bearing signatures she recognized. Not just Webb, not just the unknown contact. Preston Ashworth III, authorizing transfers, arranging payments, coordinating with names that appeared to be overseas buyers. She photographed everything. Page after page of evidence that documented a conspiracy stretching back years, touching commands across the country, generating profits that flowed into accounts her grandmother would have recognized from her own investigation 80 years ago. The Ashworth family had never stopped. They had just gotten better at hiding. She was photographing the last of the documents when she heard the boat motor. Not the skiff. Something larger, coming fast from the direction of the base. Evangeline killed her flashlight and moved to the window. A rigid-hulled inflatable was cutting through the water toward the camp. 3 figures visible. And in the lead position, standing like a man who had finally cornered his prey, was Lieutenant Commander Preston Ashworth III. He had known. Somehow, he had known they would come. She keyed the small radio clipped to her vest. "Deck, we have company. Get out of here." "Negative," Rourke's voice came back. "We are not leaving you." "That is an order, Senior Chief. Take Baptiste and go. Get the evidence we already have to Master Chief Vance. I will handle this." A long pause. Then, reluctantly, she heard the skiff's motor come to life, heading away through the channels. Ashworth's boat was close now. Close enough that she could see his face in the dim light. Close enough to see the weapon in his hands. Evangeline looked at the documents she had photographed, looked at the water surrounding the camp, looked at the darkness that had hidden her family for generations. She had 2 choices: surrender and let Ashworth control the narrative, or disappear into the bayou and trust that the water would protect her the way it always had. The choice was not difficult. By the time Ashworth reached the dock, the camp was empty. The documents remained, but the woman who had found them had vanished into the Louisiana night like smoke over black water. The hunt was not over. It was just beginning. The bayou at night was a living thing, and Evangeline moved through it like blood through veins. She knew these waters the way she knew her own heartbeat. Every channel, every sandbar, every stretch of marsh grass that could hide a woman from men who did not understand what they were hunting. Behind her, she could hear Ashworth's team crashing through the shallows. They had lights. They had weapons. They had training that had cost the government hundreds of thousands of dollars. They did not have generations of swamp water in their blood. Evangeline slipped beneath the surface of a channel so narrow it barely qualified as water, pulling herself along the muddy bottom until her lungs burned. She emerged 40 meters away, behind a cypress knee thick enough to hide her silhouette, and listened. "Spread out," Ashworth was shouting. "She cannot have gone far. Find her." His voice carried the edge of desperation. He had come here expecting to catch her red-handed, to create a narrative where she was the criminal caught in the act. Instead, she had vanished with evidence that could destroy everything his family had built. She moved again, using the sounds of their search to cover her own movement. Her grandmother had taught her mother, who had taught her, that the swamp rewarded patience and punished arrogance. Ashworth's men were loud because they were scared. Scared of the darkness. Scared of the water. Scared of the things they imagined lurking just beyond their flashlight beams. They should have been scared of her. An hour passed. Then 2. Ashworth's search grew more frantic, his orders more erratic. Evangeline circled behind them, using channels they did not know existed, until she reached the camp from the opposite direction. The documents were still there. Ashworth had been so focused on catching her that he had not thought to secure the evidence. She gathered what she could carry, stuffing papers into a waterproof bag she had brought for exactly this purpose. Then she found something she had missed before. A laptop, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, still powered on. The screen showed an email program, messages stretching back months. Correspondence with buyers in countries that did not ask questions about weapons origins. Payment confirmations routed through shell companies. And, at the center of it all, a name that made Evangeline's breath catch. Admiral Harrison Cole, Deputy Commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. Ashworth had protection at the highest levels. This was not just a family operation. This was a network embedded in the very structure of the military, using Special Operations Commands as cover for international arms trafficking. Her grandmother had uncovered one man. Evangeline had uncovered an empire. She copied what she could to a thumb drive, then slipped back into the water as Ashworth's voice grew closer. He was returning to the camp, probably to destroy the evidence he had left behind. He found a laptop missing. His scream of rage echoed across the water like something wounded. By dawn, Evangeline had reached the rendezvous point she had arranged with Rourke before the mission. A fishing pier on the edge of Terrebonne Parish, far enough from the base that Ashworth's reach would not extend. Rourke was waiting with Baptiste, both of them looking like they had not slept. We got to Vance, Rourke said immediately. Everything. She is moving it up channels that Ashworth cannot touch. There's more. Evangeline handed him the thumb drive. Admiral Cole. He is part of it. Rourke's face went pale. Cole. The Admiral Cole. The network goes all the way to the top of Special Warfare Command. Evangeline sat down heavily on the pier, exhaustion finally catching up to her. My grandmother tried to expose one smuggler. We just uncovered an operation that has been running for 80 years with protection at every level. What do we do? Baptiste asked quietly. We trust the people Vance said were watching. Evangeline looked out at the water, watching the sun paint the marsh in shades of gold and pink. We give them everything and let them do what we cannot. The call came 3 hours later. Master Chief Vance, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Chief Thibodeau, she said, I need you to come to group headquarters. Bring your evidence. All of it. Am I being arrested? A pause. No, you're being debriefed. By people who have been waiting a very long time for someone to finally put the pieces together. The debriefing lasted 6 hours. Men and women in civilian clothes who never gave their names asked questions that covered everything from her grandmother's OSS service to the documents she had photographed the night before. They had files of their own, Evangeline realized. Files that stretched back decades, tracking suspicions they had never been able to prove. Until now, when it was over, a woman with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing leaned forward across the table. Chief Thibodeau, she said, your grandmother was one of the finest operatives the OSS ever produced. Your mother served with distinction despite obstacles that would have broken lesser people. And you have just provided evidence that will dismantle a criminal network that has corrupted military commands for 3 generations. She slid a photograph across the table. Evangeline recognized it immediately. Her grandmother, young and fierce, standing with a group of people who looked equally dangerous. We have been waiting for an Ashworth to make a mistake, the woman continued. Waiting for someone with the skills and the courage to catch them. Your family has been fighting this war longer than you knew. And today you won it. Evangeline stared at the photograph of her grandmother, seeing her own reflection in those eyes from 8 decades past. What happens now, she asked. Now, the woman said with the slightest smile, we finish where your grandmother started. The arrest began at dawn 3 days later. Evangeline was not there to see Ashworth's face when the Naval Criminal Investigative Service agents walked into his office, but Rourke described it to her afterward with a kind of detail that suggested he had enjoyed every second. He kept saying there had been a mistake, Rourke said. Kept demanding to speak with Admiral Cole. Did not realize Cole had been arrested an hour earlier. The network unraveled faster than anyone had expected. Once the first dominoes fell, others rushed to cut deals, to provide testimony, to distance themselves from an operation they had happily profited from for years. Webb broke within hours of his arrest, naming names and providing documentation that confirmed everything Evangeline had found and more. The scope was staggering. Dozens of commands compromised over decades. Millions of dollars in military equipment funneled to buyers who range from private military contractors to foreign governments that should never have had access to American weapons. And at the center of it all, the Ashworth family, using their connections and their legacy to build an empire on stolen goods and broken careers. Evangeline spent those days in a strange limbo. She was not under arrest, but she was not free to return to duty either. The investigators needed her available for questions, for clarifications, for the endless process of building cases against people who had spent generations learning how to avoid accountability. On the 4th day, Master Chief Vance found her sitting on the dock at the boat bay, watching the water move past with the patience of someone who had learned to wait. It is done, Vance said, settling onto the dock beside her. Ashworth is being charged with enough counts to ensure he never sees the outside of a military prison. Cole is finished. The whole network is burning down. Good. Evangeline did not look away from the water. What about my career? Vance was quiet for a moment. The recommendation for your removal has been withdrawn. Officially, it never existed. Your record will show commendations for your role in exposing the conspiracy, And there are people talking about what comes next for you. What comes next? Vance handed her a folder. Evangeline opened it to find orders she had never expected to see. Promotion to Senior Chief Petty Officer. Assignment to a new position within Naval Special Warfare Command. A role focused on training and mentorship, with particular emphasis on developing the next generation of operators. They want you to teach, Vance said, to pass on what you know, what your family has always known. Evangeline stared at the orders, feeling something shift in her chest. For 12 years, she had fought to prove she belonged, had endured skepticism and hostility and the quiet assumption that a woman from the bayou could never truly be one of them. Now, they were asking her to shape the future of the community that had questioned her right to exist within it. I do not know if I am ready for this, she said quietly. Vance laughed, a warm sound that cut through the weight of the past weeks. Chief, you just took down a criminal network that had been operating since World War II. You outmaneuvered a commanding officer who had been planning your destruction for months. You survived a night hunt in the bayou against armed men who wanted you dead. She shook her head. If you're not ready, nobody is. The official ceremony took place a week later. Evangeline stood in the same briefing room where Ashworth had first tried to diminish her, surrounded by people who had fought beside her and for her. Rourke was there, grinning like a man who had just won a bet he had been holding for 15 years. Baptiste stood at attention with the kind of pride that made Evangeline's throat tight. And in the back of the room, she spotted a face she recognized from the debriefing, the gray-haired woman who had shown her the photograph of her grandmother. The new commanding officer, a captain whose record suggested he had been carefully chosen to rebuild what Ashworth had corrupted, pinned the anchor insignia of Senior Chief Petty Officer to her collar. Senior Chief Thibodeau, he said formally, your service to this command and to the Navy has been exemplary. Your actions have upheld the highest traditions of naval special warfare. Thank you, sir. Evangeline's voice was steady, but inside she was thinking of her grandmother, of her mother, of all the women in her family who had served and sacrificed and been forgotten by official histories. They would not be forgotten anymore. After the ceremony, the gray-haired woman approached her. They had never exchanged names during the debriefing, and Evangeline suspected they never would. Your grandmother would be proud, the woman said quietly. She always believed someone in your family would finish what she started. Did you know her? The woman smiled. I knew of her. Her reputation was considerable in certain circles. She paused. There is something else you should know. The people who trained your grandmother, the networks she built during the war, they never entirely disappeared. Some of us have been watching your family for generations, waiting to see if the bloodline would produce another one like her. Another one like her, Evangeline repeated. Someone who could move through dark water and come out the other side. The woman's eyes held secrets that stretched back decades. Someone who understood that some wars never really end. They just change shape. She pressed something into Evangeline's hand. A coin, old and worn, bearing a symbol Evangeline did not recognize. If you ever want to know more about what your grandmother really did, the woman said, find someone who recognizes that coin. They will tell you stories that are not in any official record. Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime learning how not to be seen. Evangeline looked at the coin in her palm, feeling the weight of history and possibility. One war was over, but the woman's words echoed in her mind. Some wars never really end. The bayou looked different in autumn. The summer green had faded to gold and rust, and the air carried a crispness that made the water seem clearer, the sky higher. Evangeline guided her boat through channels she had known since childhood, heading toward the family camp for the first time since everything had changed. Rourke sat in the bow, a cooler of beer between his feet and an expression of contentment on his weathered face. Baptiste had wanted to come too, but Evangeline had sent him home to New Orleans for a weekend with his family. The young man had earned it. They all had. 6 months had passed since the arrests. The trials were still ongoing, a slow grinding of military justice that would take years to fully resolve. Ashworth had tried to cut a deal, offering testimony against Admiral Cole in exchange for leniency. The prosecutors had listened politely and then declined. They did not need his cooperation. They had Evangeline's evidence, and that was more than enough. The camp emerged from the tree line like an old friend waiting. Evangeline tied off the boat and stood on the dock, breathing in the smell of mud and cypress and slow-moving water. This place had always been her sanctuary. Now it felt like something more, a connection to generations of women who had drawn strength from these waters. She had brought her grandmother's trunk with her, had been meaning to go through it properly for months, but there had always been another debrief, another meeting, another demand on her time. Today, finally, she had nothing but silence and the company of someone who understood. Rourke helped her carry the trunk inside. They spread its contents across the worn wooden table, sorting through photographs and documents and the accumulated secrets of a life that had never been fully told. "Your grandmother was something else," Rourke said, holding up a photograph of a young Marie Thibodeau standing with a group of hardied men in unmarked uniforms. "Look at these guys. They look terrified of her." They probably were. Evangeline smiled at the image. She made Gators nervous. They spent the afternoon piecing together a history that had been hidden for 80 years. Operations behind enemy lines. Intelligence networks that had spanned continents. A young woman from the Louisiana swamps who had become one of the most effective operatives the OSS had ever produced and who had been systematically erased from official records because the men who wrote those records could not accept what she had accomplished. At the bottom of the trunk, beneath everything else, Evangeline found a letter she had missed before. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the handwriting was unmistakably her grandmother's. "My dearest Evangeline," it began, "if you are reading this, then you have found the trunk and learned the truth about our family. I'm sorry I cannot tell you myself. Some secrets are too heavy to share with children, and by the time you were old enough, I was too tired to explain." Evangeline's throat tightened as she read. "I want you to know that I am proud of you. I have watched you grow into a woman of strength and courage, and I know that whatever challenges you face, you will meet them the way our family has always met them, with patience, with cunning, with the knowledge that the water is in your blood and will never let you down." The letter continued, describing things her grandmother had never spoken of. The love she had found and lost during the war. The choices she had made that still haunted her. The hope she carried that someday someone in her family would finish the work she had started. "You are the one I have been waiting for," the letter concluded. "I knew it from the moment I first held you. You have the eyes of a hunter and the heart of a protector. Whatever comes, remember that you're never alone. The bayou remembers. The water remembers. And I will be watching over you, always. With all my love, your grandmother, Marie." Evangeline sat in silence for a long time after finishing the letter. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting the room in shades of amber. Rourke had the good sense to say nothing, simply sitting with her in the quiet. She had spent her whole career trying to prove she belonged, trying to earn a place in a community that had never quite accepted her. And all along, she had belonged to something older, something deeper. A legacy of women who had shaped history from the shadows and never asked for recognition. The coin the gray-haired woman had given her was in her pocket. She pulled it out, turning it over in her fingers. The symbol on its face was worn smooth with age, but she could still make out the shape. A heron standing in water, wings half spread, ready to strike. Her grandmother's symbol, she realized, passed down through whatever network had protected and watched over her family for generations. "Chief." Rourke's voice was gentle. "Senior Chief, I mean. You good?" Evangeline looked up at him, at this man who had stood beside her for 15 years without ever doubting her. Then she looked out the window at the water that had made her who she was. "Yeah, December." She tucked the letter carefully back into the trunk. "I am good." That evening, they sat on the dock with their feet in the water and watched the sun sink below the tree line. The bayou came alive with the sounds of night creatures beginning their hunts. Somewhere in the distance, a gator bellowed. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know what part stayed with you. Maybe you know someone like Evangeline, someone who proved that the things that made them different were actually what made them dangerous. Rourke raised his beer in a silent toast. Evangeline raised hers in return. She thought about Ashworth, rotting in a cell, about Admiral Cole, watching his legacy crumble, about Webb, trading secrets for reduced sentences. They had underestimated her because of where she came from, because of what she looked like, because they could not imagine that a woman from the swamps could bring down an empire. They had forgotten the oldest truth about the bayou. Everything in it is either hunting or being hunted. And Evangeline Thibodeau had never been prey. The water moved past the dock pilings, patient and eternal. The heron on her coin seemed to catch the last light of the dying sun. And somewhere, she was certain, her grandmother was smiling.